Hello and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and I'm very excited for this month's episode with DORA, Colorado. I have Rebecca Laurie here with me. She is the Director of Communications for the Department of Regulatory Agencies of Colorado, and we have frightening topics to get into.
We do. We have some scary stuff. Good to see you, Alex.
Good to see you.
Yeah, and today we brought Jill Sarmo with the Division of Securities and Vince Plymell with the Division of Insurance to discuss some frightening and spooky topics related to the two. And so we're really glad to have them with us. It makes me think about something my 13-year-old said, which is the best like haunted house or horror house would be full of adult issues. So you around the corner and it's student loans, and the next corner is, you know, car payments and
house insurance.
Absolutely frightening stuff. And I think, you know, when we were thinking about what can we talk about for October, it made sense to bring forward some of the, you know, frightening things that we all deal with both as consumers and sometimes as business owners when considering some of the everyday adult things that we have to deal with.
And I love that your 13-year-old was talking about how scary adulthood is. You keep him young as long as possible,
no kidding.
right? I appreciate those days.
Right.
That was my favorite childhood memory, is a memory without bills, right?
Yes, no bill, right? Bills, electric bill. So anyway, let's get right into it. And we're going to start with Jill, who had some frightening financial fears she wanted to cover. The first one being something called brain fog and fraud. Can you explain what brain fog and fraud is?
Yeah, so this kind of came to mind when I was trying to think about spooky topics for today, because something that, you know, we think about a lot when it comes to like Halloween and the month of October is how, you know, when the victim in a horror film is blindly wandering through, you know, a foggy field or something, they feel lost, they don't know if danger's approaching. And so something when it comes to financial fraud that we always warn people about is becoming lost in this fog, this what we call the emotional fog, because if you are going to fall for a financial fraud, one of the ways that can happen is if a scammer or a fraudster is going to attack your emotional side of your brain instead of your rational side. And so a lot of the scams that people fall for, you know, when I go out and I talk to people, they're like, how can people fall for such stupid, obvious things, you know, like the phone call scams and the lottery scams and things like that.
The Prince of Nigeria scam.
Yes, it seems like smart people, you know, average people would not fall for that. And I always say, well, you know, when it's the right time and, you know, something is happening, and specifically when it's getting at that emotional side of your brain, anybody can fall for these. Even I can fall for them, and this is what I talk about every single day. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about how that process happens in our brains and how we get put into that emotional fog in order to fall for a scam. So if you look at it from like the neurological standpoint, it's really interesting because the way that information enters our brains, first it actually goes through the emotional part of our brain, which is the limbic system. And so any information that we're receiving is going through that emotional part of our brain before it even gets to the neocortex, which is the rational part of our brain, or the rational thinking part of our brain. And so if there's a really strong overriding emotion that's connected to something that's coming into your brain, that's really going to influence how much of that actually gets into your neocortex, and you know, how much of that decision is going to be based on your emotion versus your reason. And so we talk about a lot of scams. They utilize things like fear, excitement, panic, and all of those different tactics. Romance, yes, love.
Yes.
And so it kind of makes people turn off their rational brain, or at least it clouds it over. And so that's why we talk about it being the emotional fog that makes people fall victim to things that they normally would not fall for.
So how does this process get exploited by them? I mean, what is it that they do that tends to tip people over the edge and ignore that rational voice that must be popping up every now and again and saying something's not right.
Right. So when I go out and give presentations to consumers, I like to use a program that was actually put together by the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, which is FINRA, in conjunction with AARP. And they did they put together a bunch of years of research of fraud calls that people were actually made. They were recording calls. They went out and surveyed victims. They talked to people, and they narrowed it down to the 5 top persuasion tactics that they think fraudsters use in order to scam people out of money. And so the 5 that I think that are the most important, I always tell people you don't have to remember the names of them so much as the emotion that's associated with them. So the first one is phantom riches. So this is the idea that, they get you excited about the prospect of wealth, about the prospect of, coming into a large sum of money. So that can be used with things like the Nigerian prince scam. It can also be used with investment scams and frauds because they tell people that, you have guaranteed returns on this investment. And of course, we know with investing, there's no guarantee. There's no way you can say, oh, there's no risk. There's absolutely, you're going to make 15% returns on this investment. And so they get people excited about this prospect of, coming into this wealth and being able to do things that they normally wouldn't have been able to do. And then again, that overrides that rational thinking brain, and they can fall for scams. Another one that I really think is probably one of the most prominent ones is the idea of scarcity. So a lot of times when people, we see this a lot with like the rare coins and precious metal scams, they'll make phone calls to people and they'll say things like, oh, there's only, 5 of these coins left in the world and they're so rare. And if you don't act now, you're going to miss your opportunity. And so people will think, oh my gosh, I have to make this decision now. I'm just going to do it. And so in this program, actually, one of the fraud calls that they recorded was of a guy who was calling people and telling them just that, when these coins were minted, they did a limited number and now there's only 5 left and, you have to act now. And when they ended up arresting this guy, when they caught up to him and arrested him, he had boxes and boxes and boxes of these coins in his garage. And
oh my gosh.
But it's just that idea that it's like, you have to make this decision now, either because whatever the product is limited or your time is limited in order to make the decision.
Sure. And we all know that that's a common sales tactic. Limited time offer, that kind of thing. But when it's tied to this idea of phantom riches, it must be even more doubly powerful in that sense, I would imagine.
It is. I think it's important to remember that, when you're at Target, say, or a grocery store, and you see a buy one, get one free offer, and you think, oh, that's a really good deal. I'm getting 2 things for the price of one, and maybe you buy a pair of shoes that you end up not really liking or whatever. It's like, okay, so you lost $40 on a pair of shoes. But when it's something like an investment, and you're thinking about turning over your life savings for one of these tactics that sometimes do get used lawfully and in legitimate sales, if it's something where you're actually going to turn over a large sum of money, that's when you need to take a step back and say, is this really good for me? Does this really sound too good to be true? Are my emotions being exploited here? Are
these typically, because you've talked about them just as phone scams, are they things that are done though in person as well, or is it do they get a stronger reaction on the phone because they can, I don't know, for whatever reason?
Oh, it absolutely happens in person as well. A lot of times with phone scams, we'll see that people will get repeated phone calls because they want to try and kind of, again, build up a relationship with victims and get them to talk and tell them about their hopes and their dreams, and then they can exploit those. But it certainly happens in person. Another tactic that we talk a lot about is called source credibility. So it's where they really build up your trust in who they are. There's a great story it was actually a Securities and Exchange Commission case from a couple years ago of a guy who got an investor on the hook, and the investor was coming back into town from a business trip, and so this, the scammer said, well, I'll pick you up from the airport and we can talk about this deal. So he picked the guy up from the airport in a Mercedes-Benz. He was wearing a nice suit. He was, he took him out to a nice dinner. He drove him by a fancy house and said it was his house, and just had this guy very impressed by the fact that he was obviously a very successful person. And the investor even got to meet one of his business associates. And then they talked about the investment deal and all this stuff. And the guy was very impressed. And so he wrote a check and gave it to this guy. Well, as it turns out, this guy had just gotten out of prison, was running a new scam. He had rented the suit, he had rented the car, he drove him past a house that wasn't his, and the business associate that they actually met with had been his cellmate. And so, I mean, it's just that idea of, you know, credibility can be faked, and our emotions can be exploited, particularly trust, in a lot of ways.
And sure, when you lure a carrot, it's very easy to override those emotions. And we'll probably come back in February and talk about this a little bit more. But I find one of the more interesting scams are the sweetheart scams or the romance scams, because I think it's tapping, as you said, into that kind of same part of the brain. When somebody is kind of building this trust with you and then all of a sudden starts hitting you up for money, and why that doesn't send up a red flag is fascinating to me, but it also makes sense because neurologically it's almost like, or even biologically, you're designed to override it because that wish for the end, for that dream, is clearer than the logic that is before you and the facts that are before you.
Absolutely. And, you know, again, like you said, speaking of red flags, what they say, you know, to look out for if you're doing online dating or you're doing, you know, talking to people in chat rooms and stuff is be careful for somebody who says that they love you kind of unusually quickly, because it's that exact thing where they're trying to trigger that emotional response in you, because everybody loves hearing that they're loved. But if you've only been talking to somebody for a couple of days or even a week, and all of a sudden they're telling you they love you, you know, as nice as that may seem, it's a big red flag. Definitely, because they're trying to exploit that that part of your brain. Yeah.
I've seen a few dating apps now. At the bottom, they say if somebody's asking you for financial help, you're probably being taken.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
it's a nice warning.
Yeah.
Yes, I feel like a lot of sites themselves are recognizing that
Definitely
there are scammers getting on there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good. What else? What else is frightening?
Yeah. So, well, I thought we could talk about, so again, when I was trying to think of spooky topics, this ties in well with those persuasion tactics. One of the persuasion tactics is called social consensus. And this is the idea that we kind of want to be part of a crew. We kind of want to, you know, be one of the crowd. We want to do things that are beneficial to others. We want them to be beneficial for us. You know, if you want to give an example of it being used legitimately as a sales tactic, when you drive by McDonald's and it says 1 billion burgers sold, it's that idea that it's like, wow, if everybody else is getting these, like, they must be really good. So social consensus, again, is that kind of idea of, you know, not only trust, but just kind of wanting to be part of the group. And so that kind of leads into this idea of getting stabbed in the back. And that's when somebody you trust and a place where you feel safe ends up being something that can be really dangerous for you. And so some of the investment frauds we've heard of recently involve what we call affinity fraud. And affinity fraud is when somebody that you trust is a part of a group that you associate with, whether it's a religious group, if it's a church, or an ethnic group, families, coworkers, things like that. There's somebody within that group that will pitch an investment or pitch some sort of money-making deal, and everybody just kind of lines up to take part in this. And that's that, both the idea of source credibility because they trust this person, but it's also the idea of social consensus because they see all of these other people taking part in this deal and making money in this deal and getting excited about this deal. And so we see it a ton in certain groups. So one of the cases we had recently was a guy who was actually on one of the military bases in Colorado. He was a veteran, and unfortunately, you know, he got into the investment business when he came back from being deployed. It was kind of like his side business. He decided to start stealing money from people. And unfortunately, he exploited his association with fellow veterans and service members, and the fact that there's that trust, that innate trust in somebody that, you know, you've served with. And so he exploited that and, you know, got people to hand over their retirement savings, their children's college funds, all of that kind of stuff. And, you know, when the money all went away, they talked about the most painful thing was not the loss of their finances. It was the loss of this trust or this betrayal. And so that's really scary. I think that we want to believe that we can trust people. And I think, again, there's a time and a place to trust people and to put our trust with people. But when it comes to our finances, especially large sums, it doesn't hurt to do that second background check on a person. It doesn't hurt to check out the offering if it's an investment, just to make sure that you're dealing with somebody legitimate and that you're dealing with, a legitimate case.
I would imagine this is the toughest form because you have complete trust in a friend and never do you think that it's going to come back and hurt you in such a way.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I think all of us are so forgiving to friends that even if we think in our minds, well, maybe something could go wrong with this idea, but it's my friend, and how bad could it really be? I'll forgive whatever, trespasses might happen. It's more important to have this friendship or be involved with this group. So that social consensus overrides logic.
Exactly.
In many cases.
And this might be, I would think, one that is tough for people to come forward with.
Yes, we have a lot of reluctant witnesses and a lot of reluctant victims when we have a case like this because it takes a long time to actually convince them that their trust has been broken. Yeah. There are a lot of people that just don't want to believe that, the person willfully defrauded them or did something. They'll always oh no, he meant to do it, he meant to do the right thing, but he just made a bad investment, or he made a bad decision and lost my money, and I don't want to press charges. I don't want anything to happen. But, eventually it comes out and they start to realize that this was an intentional thing. It was a theft. And so, yeah, that can be really tough to have to sit across from people and tell them that somebody they trusted and cared for and, in a lot of cases believed were a really good person just wasn't. So.
And this is very different than, say, a nice relationship that you might form with your financial advisor and
Absolutely.
really trust your financial advisor and then find out that your financial advisor maybe didn't make the right choices with your money. There are paths to remedy that.
Yes.
Versus what you're talking about, which is there's often not much remedy that can happen.
Certainly.
I would imagine.
And often what we're seeing with cases like this where somebody is actually exploiting their position within a group, within an identifiable group, most of the time that person doesn't hold a securities license. They don't, actually have any business being in the field. They haven't studied, they haven't passed any exams, they don't have a license, they're just oh, hey, I've made a lot of money kind of playing around and now I know what I'm doing, so why don't you let me invest something for you? And so, yeah, I think, again, one way to, be sure that you're dealing with somebody who's legitimate, even if there's somebody well, is to say, hey, do you have a license to be doing this when it comes to investing? And if they don't, then that's a big red flag.
Yeah.
I would think another red flag in a lot of these is if they're looking for an investment, they're asking for large amounts of money, or you should dip into your retirement savings or your kid's college fund. I think it'd be one thing if it's just try it with me for some safe amount, but let's dissolve your retirement savings would be a red flag.
Exactly. And I think, even if they are asking for a small amount of money, most of the time, if it's somebody who's legitimate and who's doing something legitimately, they should be making you well aware of the risks that are associated with any type of investment, but especially something that, kind of your average retail investor might not get involved in on their own. They might rely on a professional to help them with it. But if it's just somebody approaching you at your kid's baseball game saying, hey, I heard about this really cool deal. Why don't you write me a check and I'll throw it in there for you and see what comes out. I think you need to be careful about that if they're making it sound like there's no way that you could lose. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I guess I have a question. Do a lot of these people that go through these scams, are they offering real businesses that you can look up, or is it typically some corporation that you can't look up, that it's completely made up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it depends. Sometimes there are things that, they don't exist, or it's maybe they exist, but they're not properly registered. So anybody who's doing a securities offering where they're raising investment money has to register it or at least file for an exemption. So they have to at least notify the division or the SEC that they're going to be doing this type of offering. And so that needs to be registered. Sometimes people will just, make things up completely.
Just buy stocks.
Yeah. And so, I think, again, an easy way to make sure that you're dealing with a legitimate offering is to give us a call or go online with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. They can, assist you in looking these things up.
Speaking of money, let's switch gears really quickly to the idea of cryptocurrency. I thought that was cute and punny. And what might be frightening, the frightening side of cryptocurrency?
Yes, well, this actually ties in really well to that Affinity fraud thing, because in the division we're seeing a lot of, kind of social groups, and we've even had a case where, there was somebody in a church who was going around to, different parishioners and saying, hey, like, I've got this super cool, side thing that I'm doing. Do you want to give me some money and I'll buy you Bitcoin? And, it can be something that you make money off of, and then he just ran away with it. So, it's that idea that, and I tied in cryptocurrency, your good idea of cryptocurrency, with when technology bites back.
Yes.
Because it's a good example of one of those investment opportunities that comes up that oftentimes does rely on a new technology or something that your average person isn't super well versed in. And so it's really easy to make it sound lucrative and to make it sound new and exciting. And cryptocurrency has been one of those fields. So we're seeing a lot of things called ICOs, which stands for initial coin offerings, where people are utilizing cryptocurrency to raise money for certain products, or if they're actually raising money in order to launch a crypto-based company. And so something we want to make investors particularly aware of is if you are approached or you happen to come across one of these ICOs, you need to kind of do the investment test in your head. Not all ICOs qualify as securities or investments, but if they do, they need to be properly registered. And so there's a really easy test that in the regulatory business, it's called the Howey test, based on the case that established it. But you ask yourself 4 questions. You say, is there an investment of money? Is it in a common enterprise? So is it something that a lot of people are going to be involved in? Is there an expectation of profit from whatever you're looking at? And then the 4th question is it through the efforts of another, through like a third party? And if it meets those 4 requirements, you're dealing with a security. It needs to be registered, and you need to be working with a legitimate professional. And so currently with the division, we have what's called the ICO task force. Because this is an issue we're seeing so much of, the commissioner convened this task force to actually, identify some of these ICOs that are out there operating and they're collecting money from people, and there's no regulation tied to them. There's no way for us to really trace, because cryptocurrency is really difficult to trace. And so we're going out and trying to identify some of these fraudulent offerings that are being made to people in Colorado, and trying to shut them down before too many people get harmed.
And to be clear, the whole reason that those regulations are in place is because of what you were saying, which is people tend to exploit loopholes and then run away with the money.
Yes.
And then the money is really just gone. It's very hard to recover it.
Yeah, so again, I want to stress that not all ICOs are scams, not all ICOs are securities, and not all cryptocurrency-based things are scams. But just the nature of the fact that it's something new, it's something exciting, it's something that a lot of people don't have a really strong grasp of. I mean, even I, I'm still trying to get my head around this. It's such a new thing. But anytime you have something like that where there's this base of excitement built, that's going to bring scammers to the table.
To give you an idea, when they talk about the cryptocurrency miners, immediately I start thinking about my son's Minecraft game. And just, somebody there
just chipping away.
pickaxing away and building bricks. But really, I mean, there's no relation to that at all. But it's such a hard concept to get your mind around that you'll grasp for anything that seems to make sense to you, which also is very interesting about finances because it is very elusive for most of us.
Sure. And I think that's a good rule of thumb is, rely on the licensed professionals, who know what they're doing to give you advice. If you want to kind of play and do some investing, on your own and kind of pick and choose what you want to put your money towards, do something that you really know well.
Yes, absolutely. Well said. We'll be right back on Connect and Collaborate. Stay with us. Welcome back to Connect and Collaborate. Once again, I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and we have Rebecca Laurie in studio today. She is with the Department of Regulatory Agencies, lovingly known as DORA, Colorado, and we're having a fantastic talk here about frightening and spooky tales, but it's stuff we need to talk about, right?
Yes, so now that we live in the adult world, right, we have to think about some of these kind of frightening and spooky topics when it comes to our money, our businesses, our lives in general. And so we just spoke to Jill Sarmo with the Division of Securities, and now we're going to talk to Vince Plymell, who is with the Colorado Division of Insurance, about a really interesting topic, in my opinion, because I don't know a lot about it. I'm not sure a lot of people do know a lot about it, and that is pre-need funeral contracts. So Vince, what is a pre-need funeral contract just at a base level?
You're right. It is something that most people aren't familiar with, but I think you'll understand the concept. Anyone who's had to deal with funeral arrangements knows it can be a hassle. So what some people do is they work with a funeral home to pre-select these things, and this can be the room for the service, the chapel arrangement, embalming, picking up the body, the casket, that sort of things, to get it done, to get it paid for ahead of time, which you can see that makes sense. I mean, we hear about people buying cemetery plots in advance. Now, this specifically does not include cemetery plots, but it's the same idea. You want to get this done ahead of time, maybe so that your surviving family members don't have to deal with it. It makes sense.
And so what is the overall concept of the idea that, to put money towards a funeral or burial up front versus just allowing your life insurance to take care of it?
Well, the idea, again, is to get it done ahead of time, but I guess the risk or the concern for people are, okay, so I'm putting this money up front, I'm buying this thing now that I'm not going to use for 10 or 15 or 20, 25 years. What's going to happen to that money? And the rules around these sort of contracts is the money has to be put in trust or in escrow so that it's there to be paid for when the time comes, when you pass away and you need to have those services paid for. And that's the challenge because not all businesses stick around forever and ever, and the
Funeral homes occasionally die.
Funeral homes occasionally die, as do all businesses. They're not always going to be there. There isn't, there's no guaranteed permanence, with these things, and that's the concern people need to have when they go into this is asking questions to find out, what's going to happen to their money, and will it be put in escrow and in trust appropriately.
So what is included in such a pre-need funeral contract? What do you get for putting your money up front?
Yeah, exactly. Well, again, you don't have to buy everything, but one thing it doesn't include, as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't include cemetery plots, but it can include picking up the body, embalming, the rooms for the service, the rooms for viewing, funeral services themselves, the casket, the vault, transportation, permits, death certificates, even getting obituaries. if you've ever put an obituary in the paper, you know that that's an expensive proposition these days.
It really is. And I have lots of things I'd like to say about my life, so, I'm going to save up for that.
Once you go past like 3 lines,
Yeah,
it becomes
it does
exorbitantly
come wordy,
expensive.
for
Yes,
sure.
it
Still
really
cheaper
does.
than a gravestone, I would imagine.
Yes,
That's true.
very true.
So it includes those things, the type of things we associate with a funeral.
And so why does the Division of Insurance even have a role in this?
Yeah, it is. It is a weird thing. I know when I started the division, I was like, why are we involved in this? Because these are services, as you mentioned, that can be paid for by life insurance. It doesn't have to be, but it can be.
Well, then that's typically why we buy life insurance, right? Is to cover
one of the
these
reasons.
One of the reasons. Not the only reason.
Not the only reason, but yeah, that is a very
Yes.
common aspect of life insurance, or what people use it for. So that's why we regulate this one little aspect, these pre-need funeral contracts. Funeral homes themselves are regulated by another division in DORA, the Division of Professions and Occupations, actually regulate the homes and do the licensing there.
Okay.
But this insurance aspect to it, this putting money here, for this future thing, is regulated by the Division of Insurance. And again, it's that life insurance angle that the legislature put it in our laps at one point.
So what does a license from the Division of Insurance mean?
What it means is, as with any of the licensees, in anything in DORA, that the person has met certain requirements. They have to show that they have the capability for managing the funds. There are certain reporting requirements they have to do every year. That they have to, and anybody in the company has to have their fingerprints registered with the division. Again, just so, because
covering yourself.
This is money that's being put in trust, and so if these things aren't done, if they aren't licensed by the Division of Insurance, then that funeral home is operating outside of the law. Maybe not on purpose; it might be unwittingly, but they're not operating within the law if they don't get that license from the division, that register.
So I am curious, if you put your money up front, it could be 20, 30 years, let's say, before you actually go to collect, right? Because you've died and you need your family needs your funeral. That money that is held in trust, is that invested typically by the company, or do you know what happens to those dollars? Does the division track those dollars?
The division doesn't. It's not typically invested. It should be just set aside for that money, because you don't want it to be subject to losses. But
it's not set up like a bank then.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. But the division actually isn't tracking all of the dollars. The company should be. But this goes to the sort of things you should be asking when you enter into these arrangements: is what happens to my money? Is it going to be put in trust? What is the arrangement? Where, what are the details of this? I want to find out about it. In addition to finding out, is the pre-need seller licensed by the division? Where's the money going to go? What happens to my money if the company goes out of business? As we said, not all companies stick around. What happens if I move out of state? People don't stick around. Especially as they get older, they might move to be closer to their kids or their grandkids, or move back to where they grew up, something like that. Can they change it and switch it to another funeral home? What's the refund policy if they have a change of heart? Typically what we see in the industry is within the first 7 days you can get 100% refund. After that, the folks are able to keep 15%. But it's still worth asking about. And then also be very clear, as with anything, what are you buying? What are the services that you are contracting for? What are the things that you expect to get? And make sure that that's spelled out so that you're clear with it, and you can make that clear to your surviving family members.
Yeah, I don't want to pay $100,000 and be put in a plywood box, right?
That's it exactly.
Yeah.
You want to be very. You want to know exactly what you've
I want
signed up for, and again, it's kind of like your will, your wishes. You want your family members, your heirs, to know these things and be clear on it. Especially if your intent was, I'm doing this to relieve you of that burden.
Oh yeah.
You don't want it to be just a big question mark and like, well, I know Dad bought this thing and
He
I don't know what it is.
Once in passing at dinner 4 years ago.
Yeah. You want to be clear so that you can tell the people that need to deal with this what's going on with it. And the other thing is it's good to ask all those fresh questions up front, obviously, but it's worth checking in as well. And going on, because it doesn't mean just because you got good, clear answers and everything was fine and okay in the beginning doesn't mean that changes might happen in 5 years, 10 years down the road.
Particularly with legislation, perhaps it goes out from underneath the Division of Insurance, right? It's something you definitely need to check
on.
And
is the company still around in good financial health? Have they when they maybe they've changed owners or changed leadership. Did the books get managed accordingly, passed on accordingly?
It's a lot to think about for your funeral contract to have to follow that.
It's the only thing in life that's guaranteed besides taxes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Is that change?
Well, and as with anything, and like some of the things Jill was talking about,
the other frightening topic
is these aren't necessarily for everybody. You want to figure out, is this right for you? As with any product, is this the thing that you need? Is it worth the money that you want to put towards it? Is it something that your family's looking forward to or not? And make those decisions and figure it out. It isn't you want to be careful of anybody who's trying to high pressure you into it and using some of those tactics Jill mentioned, like maybe some fear based, maybe a little. It needs to be right for you.
This is something that I had never even seen before. I don't know that I've ever noticed that I've never seen it advertised or anything like that, right? I see the occasional billboard here and there for a funeral home, but for the most part, I had never heard of these pre-funeral contracts.
You may not be in the demographic, right?
You know what? That's fair. That is fair. But now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, there's so many decorations and songs I need to have.
As long as you're making a mental note or writing that down and a notepad for now, and then let's see as you progress into the demographic, maybe.
Yes, absolutely.
So one of the some of my favorite commercials are the insurance companies that highlight some of the kind of wackier situations that people get into and end up filing a claim. So I asked Vince to address some of the scary complaints that the Division of Insurance.
I'm sure you see a lot.
Yes, we do. When Rebecca said, we want scary stuff. We want this Halloween theme. I thought about it and asked some of our folks. One of the top ones we see, and this is on the probably more the homeowners insurance side of things,
which is scary in and of itself.
Exactly. It's one of those adult things that as a kid you don't realize that your parents are dealing with this stuff.
One day I will grow up to have a great homeowners policy.
Exactly. That I have to look at all the time, or at least once a year. Creepy contractors. Okay, and this is not to, let's say, besmirch the name of all contractors, but there are ones out there, and we hear about this, particularly in the summer months after hailstorms. Okay, so fortunately, we've probably finished with hail here in Colorado, hopefully. But these are the folks who come out of the woodwork after a major event like that and are knocking on doors and who are promising the world in terms of, this is how this is work. I can get you this sort of thing from the insurance company. And it's going to cost this. It's going to cost that. And they can be pushy. They can be, underhanded. They can, really do some strong-arm tactics. And it can be folks who call as well after those types of things. We don't regulate contractors. Those are regulated actually usually at the city or county level. But we hear about it. Obviously, when people call with their insurance issues, they'll mention this. The insurance companies tell us about this as well. It's one of those things that is just a continual yearly thing that we hear about, and we want people to be careful.
You want to arm them with knowledge. Yeah.
And so what else? What else are some of the scary aspects of the complaints that the division receives?
Well, some of the other things that we see, I think one of the, this is very much in line with something Jill was talking about, where insurance agents are pressuring people into liquidating life savings, college savings, that sort of things, to buy life insurance policies. Again, life insurance is something that's useful in the end for a variety of reasons. I don't know if it's worth, cashing in your retirement or your savings to do that sort of thing, because if you just think about it, life insurance is really, and truth be told, death insurance, right? To be paid. And so your retirement savings are for when you retire.
Right. That's what you're going to live on.
That's what the money you want to live on and enjoy those later years in life. Now, you can't take the money with you. And so...
What? I disagree.
Buying life insurance. So it's one of those things of...
The Egyptians certainly disagree.
Yes. But you have to take just little small representations of money. It's one of those things of you've got to be careful with people who are really doing the high pressure sales tactics on you to try and, like we said, what are the red flags for the scams? If they're telling you, liquidate your retirement savings to invest in this or buy this, or this is what you need to do, and this, guaranteed this is going to be the greatest thing ever.
I've actually had one of those pitches, and the crux of that pitch is that it's a life insurance policy, but also an investment. And they will show you charts that you're able to withdraw that money however you like. And there might be some penalties, but it's fewer penalties than if you were to withdraw your retirement savings early. But if you really go through and add it up, if you really carefully do your due diligence, you realize that there really is few benefits to that type of a model. There might be some.
Yeah, it might work for some people.
Yeah.
Like you say, you do the homework, you get the pencil and paper out, and you do your homework, and it might work out for some people. But again, it's if someone's really pressuring you into it, and who's not necessarily maybe representing the risks fairly, you don't think they are.
Right.
That's when you need to just stop back. Pull back, ask questions, and try and figure this out and add this up. And maybe it's worth a call to us, the Division of Insurance, and say, does life insurance work this way, and what does this mean? And this agent mentioned this, that, and the other, and is he or she licensed, and that sort of thing. They can check on that sort of thing, because as with investing, a licensed professional should be giving you all of the facts, both good and bad, not just selling you on the good.
Right. That's right. The kind of pipe dream associated with it. The phantom riches. Yes.
The other thing I'll mention, kind of in that same vein, is on health insurance. So one of the things we're seeing are agents claiming that limited benefit health insurance policies or short-term policies are just as good as regular insurance. That insurance you might get from an employer or ACA insurance. And look at this. They have this fantastic low premium. Well, there's a reason they have a fantastic low premium. You pay, you get what you pay for. They have their reason they're called limited benefit plans, because they don't cover much. They're going to have limitations on, say, the visits to a doctor. They might have limitations on what they cover when you go to the hospital. A $5,000 limit when you go to the hospital. But $5,000 doesn't get you much in a hospital.
No, it's a drop in the bucket
these days. Yeah, and so. These are really difficult, and we hear the complaints from people who they bought it thinking, hey, this is great. I found the secret, health insurance. Everybody's talking about health. Oh, I found the deal, and we hear from them when they're getting because after those limits, then they're on the hook for the rest of that bill.
Yeah.
And they're calling us, going, well, what can I do about it? And in those cases, it's really difficult for us to do anything. That's the policy they bought.
Right.
It's not that the company's not living up to the policy. They truly are, but it's limited in nature, and they're on the hook for the many thousands of dollars after that. And so it's, again, there's a time and place for these sort of plans. Maybe if you really need something to bridge you from, maybe this employer to this employer, or between insurance, and you need it for a short period of time, and you want to cover it, but they're not designed to be long range coverage for
Right.
For your serious issues.
Exactly. Well, and it goes back. One of the things I learned at a very young age, 18 being that young age, always read what you're signing, right? You've got to read that fine print. You could end up as a human centipede like they do in the South Park episode, right? Because they didn't read Apple's new terms and conditions. You just click on it and go. Which is very scary in and of itself. You got to read that fine print.
Right.
That's very important to consumers.
Well, going back to what we talked about with the pre-need funeral, make sure you understand what you're buying, and ask the questions. And can the person explain it to you? Can you understand it? And if not, if it seems, insurance is a world that's filled with a lot of jargon, a lot of industry information, and you're going to get these things on paper, and you're going to get all this stuff. Call us and ask and say, what does this mean? How does this work? They mentioned this type of product, they said this, they said that. Is that true? Can it really work out that way?
Right.
Whether it's life insurance, whether it's health insurance, whether it's your homeowners, your auto, your pre-need funeral contract, it's all jargony and insider baseball. So call us and ask before you sign on the line. Because you'll definitely be calling us afterwards when it's an issue, and it's much harder to fix and rectify. We can, in some instances, if they're not living up to the policy, if they did something wrong. We recovered last year. We recovered nearly $11 million for Colorado consumers on those types of things.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always work.
Right.
Right. I think that's kind of the final note, is that whenever you enter uncharted waters or scary situations, you enter with a note of caution, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And it's okay. Sometimes we do that on purpose, and we should take those kinds of risks because the benefits can outweigh the risks, as long as you know what you're signing, you've done your due diligence on your side to make sure that the people who you are working with really have your best interest at heart. And that's all about being an adult, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
You know what else is a really scary concept sometimes is going to get your hair done. and you go with somebody and you walk out and it is a nightmare of a haircut.
And I think anyone, male or female, can relate to that.
Yes.
So thank you for bringing that up, because at DORA, the Division of Professions and Occupations regulates salons, nail salons, hair salons, barber shops, all under the Barber and Cosmetology Licensure Program. Now, individuals get licensed, but also the shops need to be licensed.
Okay.
And what they found is that there are shops out there that really have lapsed on re-registering for their licensure, and it really is a protection issue for not only the professionals who work there, but also the clientele. So what they're doing is they are offering a grace period of 60 days for any shop that has not been licensed or it does not have their license up to date. And it's only valid October 1st through November 30th. So it's really important that any type of beauty-based business across the state take advantage of this opportunity now so they can register penalty-free without having to pay any kind of late fines. Of course, those shops that have been in really good standing all this time, I think it also are telling their kind of unlicensed counterparts, I would imagine, that they also need to be licensed too, because it is the way to stay accountable. That they're not hiring, inexperienced, unlicensed professionals that Put a razor close to your head and don't know what they're doing, or chemicals, you know, around your head and don't know what you're doing.
Right.
That's the whole reason that that industry is licensed and licensed so carefully, because they are operating with sharp objects, heated objects, chemicals, and
It's
certainly
a whole science lab in there.
it is. That's exactly. It's a science
and
lab.
standards of hygiene as well.
Sure.
Absolutely.
And then we hear about the nightmares of certainly nail salons and people walking out and losing digits because of unsanitary conditions. So it is a really important thing that the shops be registered. Now, as a consumer, you can go up on our website and look that up and find out yourself. But the division really wants to get that message out to the shops themselves. Get registered. And now October 1st through the 30th of November, and they will get a reprieve on any kind of late fees or fines that would have been associated with not registering.
Yes. And we always provide DORA's website, but I will make sure to keep an extra link at cobrt.com/radio. Check out DORA Colorado. Any of those episodes, you'll find this episode and more. We will make sure to have that link up for salons to be able to get back up on their licensure.
If they have lapsed,
If
yes.
they have lapsed, because that's a nice grace period that you're offering for them to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Happy
Yeah.
October.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, and happy Halloween coming soon. And I appreciate this frightening topics that we covered. I feel pretty good about all of them.
Yeah, I do
They're no
too.
longer
Yeah.
spooky.
Yeah.
Have a great day. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. Thanks. Hello and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I'm